Configuring TLS for Azure SQL Managed Identity is a crucial step in securing your database connections. In this guide, we will walk through the process step by step. First, let's start with the basics. Transport Layer Security, or TLS, is a cryptographic protocol used to provide secure communication between a client and a server. Azure SQL Managed Identity allows you to authenticate to Azure SQL database using an automatically managed identity in Azure Active Directory. To configure TLS for Azure SQL Managed Identity, you need to have an Azure SQL database and an Azure Active Directory. You also need to have the necessary permissions to configure the database in the Active Directory. The first step is to enable Managed Identity for your Azure SQL database. You can do this by going to the Azure portal, selecting your database, and clicking on the Managed Identity tab. From there, you can toggle the status to on and then click Save. Next, you need to configure the TLS settings for your database. You can do this by going to the Connection Security tab and selecting the TLS version you want to use. It is recommended to use the latest version of TLS, which is currently TLS 1.2. After configuring the TLS settings, you need to register your database with Azure Active Directory. You can do this by going to the Azure Active Directory tab and clicking on the Register button. This will create a service principal for your database in the Active Directory. Once your database is registered, you can configure the authentication settings. You can do this by going to the Authentication tab and selecting the Managed Identity option. From there, you can select the service principal you created earlier and enter the client secret. Finally, you need to test the connection to make sure it is working correctly. You can do this by using a tool like SQL Server Management Studio or Azure Data Studio. Simply connect to your database using the Managed Identity and verify that the connection is secure. Best practices for configuring TLS for Azure SQL Managed Identity include using the latest version of TLS, configuring the TLS settings correctly, and testing the connection regularly. It is also recommended to use a secure client secret and to rotate it regularly. In conclusion, configuring TLS for Azure SQL Managed Identity is a straightforward process that requires some basic knowledge of Azure SQL Database and Azure Active Directory. By following the steps outlined in this guide, you can secure your database connections and protect your data from unauthorized access.